afternoon, morning, Will, and everybody else who is watching us from the other side of the pond. My name is Agnieszka Łukaszczyk, and I'm a Senior Director for European Affairs at Planet, based in Brussels. We're very happy to have this discussion about actual real problems. Obviously, climate change is real. It's not just a discussion that we're having. This is something that we are all concerned about. According to Paris Agreement, until the end of the century, we want to make sure that the temperature rise is below 2%, ideally 1.5%. A lot of biodiversity has been affected by climate change and environmental issues. And actually, one would argue that actually biodiversity loss is the most pressing issue than a climate change itself, because it is happening now. It is happening much faster. We at Planet, we are a mission-driven company. I'm not sure if everyone knows about who we are. We are a largest Earth observation satellite operator in the world. We used to be a largest satellite operator in general, but Starlink has, Elon Musk has sent a lot of satellites. So Starlink has more satellites than we do, but for Earth observation, we're still number one, and we're working very closely with the Copernicus program, to which we are a contributing mission, and many other players. Planet is as I said, mission-driven company. This is why we care about these issues, and this is why we wanted to do this panel. Our co-founders really do care about having a positive impact on the planet, and this is not just a PR stunt. It is actual. They genuinely believe in that, and I know that because I've known them way before Planet was even an idea, and that kind of notion has always been in their mind, and this is why Planet has been created. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our speakers today. If we can move to the next slide. Thank you very much. Will Marshall, the co-founder and CEO of Planet, is today with us, connecting from California. We have Mauro Facchini, who is the head of Earth observation at DG DEFIS. We have Ms. Florica Fenghoye, who is the Director General at DG Environment. And we have Indra Den Bakke, who is the co-founder and CEO of Overstory, and Andreas Dahl-Jorgensen, the Managing Director of Norway's International Climate and Forest Initiative. We cannot see Andreas right now due to some connection issues, but hopefully he will connect with us visually. If not, we do have him on audio. Can we move to the next slide? Okay. So just some logistical information, just housekeeping. You will be able to ask questions. We will have some discussion first, moderated by me. Towards the end, in the last 20-15 minutes, we will take questions from the audience. You can just put them input them in the question section of the control panel. And if some of your questions are unanswered, just send us an email at marketing@planet.com, and we will be happy to address your questions. Thank you so much. We can turn off the presentation, and let's start the discussion. You know, our speakers have been invited today not just because they have impressive jobs, but they're also because they're like-minded, and they do care about the environment. And since the European Union has put forward as one of its main priorities the European Green Deal, that really demonstrates that Europe wants to take a leadership and is taking leadership in this area. Perhaps I would start with Florica. Could you a little bit tell us about the European Green Deal? In the sense, what are your priorities? And do you think, I mean, it's a great initiative. Do you think it's a feasible initiative? Do you think by working together, we can actually achieve what we want to achieve?
Well, it would almost take a longer session than this to just explain everything, but let me start with something rather simple. Because for those who have followed a bit the EU project, I personally believe that since we had the internal market projects from President Delors, so really some time ago, we never had such a forward-looking, transformative initiative since then. But now we have it with the with the Green Deal. And why is it? Because it's really a transformative issue to address the triple crisis. You mentioned already, you have climate change, but you also have pollution, and you have biodiversity loss. And this is basically this Green Deal is our roadmap to address it within 1 decade, because we don't have that much time. But now we also have a other crisis, the pandemics, which is exacerbating all of this, but it's actually also illustrating why we have to act, because the pandemics is a reaction to where we have failed in the past. And now the issue is that we want to come out not only with a transformation, but also a green transformation, and we want to have a recovery on top of it. So that's not so easy. And that means we cannot just go with a few proposals, with a few legislative acts. Industry always tells me we need predictability, and they need to be assured that we are coherent. And I do understand it, because it's a lot about investment, big investments, if we want to change the way we consume and we produce. But that means we have to get really everybody on board. It's not just, the European institutions. It also the member states have to buy in, the industry who make the investments. But it's also about convincing the citizen and the consumer, because they would have to say, well, actually, I come out of a pandemic now, and I might have lost my job, or my perspective for my job security is different. So how can we convince them that by going into more sustainable, we see that Andreas is now on, great, by making sure that we convince everybody to buy in and say, yes, it's worth it, because you will have long-term sustainability, long-term also jobs. That's important. But it's not easy. And I think, and there I come back more a little bit of what we all here will discuss. Of course, you need to also measure then what you want to achieve. And that's measuring, monitoring, because as we always say, what gets measured gets acted upon. At least you can demonstrate, is it going in the right direction or not? And we have set the framework. We have the biodiversity strategy, zero pollution action plan, the circular economy action plan, farm to fork. We have all these policy ideas, but now we translate that into very specific legislation. But we also have to make sure that this legislation is implemented, enforced, is working, has traction. And there comes, for instance, one other example which we come up with is the 8th Environmental Action Plan, which is also, or will be, hopefully, a legal binding instrument in order to monitor whether the trends under the Green Deal are observed. And that goes really until 2030, because that's the decade we want to act on. And there, of course, monitoring again is important. Actually, we will also put forward new monitoring frameworks and ideas, and we will want to consult. And I use this opportunity now. Yes, we will consult on the headline indicators, or the bigger indicators. And then we will see how this works. But it really needs all of us. I mean, those who are on the call, but also hopefully those who are now listening in, because I understood there's a lot of interest, but on all walks of life, people have to come in.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I think this is the key, that this is one of those initiatives that it really should involve everybody. This is not a one vertical that we're looking at. This is a horizontal approach that's going to affect everybody. So public system, industry, citizens at large, academia should really be part of this for sure. And you did mention tracking and monitoring, and obviously satellite data can help there. We do think that this green transition should be data driven and evidence based. Will, how can we contribute? How companies like Planet, but not of course just Planet, but how Earth observation industry can contribute to these goals?
Well, firstly, thanks for everyone to be here. And Florika, I completely agree with everything you've just said. Look, we all have to take responsibility for the planet and how we've affected it in radical ways. We have huge biodiversity loss across the planet. Most of life, 70% of life by numbers, has been destroyed over the last 40 years. This is not a hypothetical future statement. It's already gone. And then of course there's climate, which is a separate challenge that sits on top of that. And as the planet warms, it exacerbates challenges for both biodiversity and for ourselves. And look, we all take responsibility for that. and you can't manage what you don't measure, as Florica was hinting. And of course, Earth observation data is a foundational. It's not the only tool, but it's a foundational tool to help that to happen, because it's wide scale, it's consistent across all the different countries, and it can have uniform measurement systems that help with a lot of those action. So I think companies can help with innovation, with technology. I mean, the fantastic thing about the situation, as Florica mentioned, we've got to come out of the pandemic and transition straight into a sustainable economy. And so it's a hard thing, but it's what we've seen in the pandemic. What gives me hope is that we've changed behavior really dramatically as a society for the pandemic, and we just need to do that again. Different set of actions, some are the same, like less flying, but a lot of different ones. It's not so much not handshaking people and wearing masks, is it more like, okay, change your diet a little bit, continue to fly a little bit less, and recycle more, and all these actions. It's going to be I think that gives me hope, because these things are actually very tractable. We know what to do, and we have these new tools to bring to bear, like Earth observation data. Earth observation data can obviously help in a number of ways, tracking deforestation and stopping it, helping agricultural yield, and monitoring sustainable agricultural practices. Agriculture is a core part of a transition. As Florica mentioned, the Farm to Fork initiative that the European Union has, and then tracking key biodiverse areas, ensuring sustainable fishing, and Earth observation data, regular Earth observation data, can be very helpful with that. Then we've got these tremendous new tools like the Copernicus satellites, Sentinel satellites, as well as NewSpace satellites, and they're very complementary. The Copernicus style satellites are higher radiometric accuracy, better for scientific baselining, more spectral bands for more uses. At the same time, the NewSpace movement are having more frequent imagery and higher resolution, and those two things are very complementary, and can be added together. And we'll come to more examples, but look, you know, the bottom line is we're all in this together, and we all take a responsibility together for this important challenge facing the planet.
Absolutely. And I think what you said, which was quite a nice example of the fact that how a pandemic has changed the way people behave, and something that, you know, we've been talking about environment, and we're saying, people were saying it's going to take forever, it's impossible, we're so used to certain ways. But actually, you know, that last 2 years demonstrated that not only new space companies are agile, but also people can be. So that's very promising as well. Mauro, Will has mentioned Copernicus satellites and Sentinels, and what do you think Copernicus? What kind of role Copernicus is going to play in this, in the European Green Deal, and what its role and focus is going to be? Are you still working that out, or is that pretty clear already? Because obviously Copernicus's main role is monitoring environment, so that's obvious that the role is going to be essential.
Yes, thank you, Agnieszka. It's a pleasure, first of all, to be with you. Maybe just 10 seconds of history. So Copernicus was called GMES initially, but the first GMES wording, people know Global Monitoring for Environment and Security, but the very first name was Global Monitoring for Environmental Security. So this was really, when it started, really the security of our environment. So I think that biodiversity is one really of the primary goals of one of the main reasons for the generation of Copernicus. And indeed, when we look at the products that are generated by Copernicus, observed by the Sentinels, our planet, its health is really primary. So we are continuously looking into that. Also new missions, new satellite missions that are foreseen to be launched in the close future are really looking in that direction. So we are looking into new missions to look, for example, to the polar zones. We're looking in missions that are hyperspectral, that would help even to check better what is the health situation of our planet. And so green is important, as everything that we are doing now is really looking into a transition that has to be green, digital, and resilient. So even for Copernicus, we are going in that direction. We have really to the contribution to the green part, what we are doing, integrating as much as possible digital solution, but also become resilient. You spoke about the pandemics, and the pandemics demonstrated that we are not resilient. So we have really to create methods in which we are more capable to respond to unforeseen things. And maybe by observing, by measuring things, and I think Earth observation is a good tool for measuring, we can probably anticipate and be more resilient for the future. And in this respect, clearly, big projects like Copernicus would be useful, but also interacting with commercial companies that can provide additional information that are not generated by a public finance program. So this kind of cooperation, it's for me, in my view, to the benefit for the whole community. When I say community, I'm thinking globally, because we can generate data, and actually researchers or several communities are looking into data in observation that they can use that and can be applied for their own means. So the more we can observe, I think the more we can contribute to safeguard our planet.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think it was almost, there was this foresight with putting with starting the Copernicus program or the GMES program, because imagine that we didn't have that and we would just now be waking up and thinking about, oh, perhaps there need to be some satellites in place. Will be a bit behind the game. So, but I would like to move a little bit, since you've been talking about the role of industry, and we're talking about the role of industry. We don't just talk about the data providers, but also the downstream sector. And Indra, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your role, because you're a young company, and I'm actually very happy to see how you've been growing. You have won the Planet Copernicus Masters Challenge 2.5 years ago or so. There's, as we talked earlier, there's only the 2 of you at the company now, and now you're 15. You're combining Earth observation data and artificial intelligence, particularly with a focus on forestry. Why? So, for instance, why did you go to this area? And do you think this is going to go? Companies like yours will be able to really contribute it to this effort of the European Green Deal and focusing on biodiversity in particular. How do you see your role?
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of, as mentioned before, there's a lot of great data available now, and we felt in the downstream making this data actionable for different stakeholders. I think there's where we still saw a huge opportunity, where we as a company could add a lot of value, and added a lot of value in recent years. And we really see it as all hands on deck, right? We need all stakeholders at the table to move forward as quickly as possible. So yes, we need the data providers, we need the startups, we need industry all collaborating, because it's not just the right thing to do, but also because it's a huge business opportunity, right? I think, as mentioned before, I think a European Commission study also highlighted the loss of biodiversity will cost the global economy up to 14 trillion euros by 2050. So that's huge. And you're going to have whole industries like forestry, utilities, railroads, agriculture, insurance, where biodiversity loss is really threatens their core business. And I think that's where a company like ours can play a huge role in serving companies in this industry with actionable vegetation intelligence that they can use to improve their decision making, to reduce the risk to their business. And that's also part of our mission and our growth plan, to continuously add new information to improve decision making. We learn along the lines. Not everything we know already what will happen in the coming years. So I think having a startup there that can help, that's flexible, that can move agile and help these companies is crucial to actually see this data being used in the field.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it's I almost feel like you and Andreas should talk later after the after the panel, because I'm sure there could be some ways of collaboration. We are talking about forestry, Andreas. I mean, we have invited you for various reasons, but one of it is that what NICFI is doing, it's really extraordinary, and it's pioneering the way Earth observation data, particularly commercial Earth observation data, can be used by public sector. And I wanted you to elaborate a little bit on that, because pretty much, Norway is paying for the developing countries with tropical rainforests to have access to free data. Why? First of all, why are you doing that? Second of all, why not just developing your own satellites? Why going to commercial companies? And is this working? I mean, this is a really, you know, what you're doing has a really global vision, and hopefully we would see more of that. And what NICFI is doing could be serving as a model, but I would love for you to share a little bit more information. You're muted.
Mute, Andreas.
Sure, I'm happy to, and I'm glad I'm not here to talk about technology, because clearly I'm fairly handicapped. The solution to get in here was to try at the same time over and over again. So that's not only the definition of insanity, it's also sometimes what's needed. I think the reason, in short, to your question, why did we do this? So essentially, the partnership with Planet and KSAT and Airbus is about making high-resolution satellite imagery available to the world for free, right? On a monthly basis, and it is, I think, it supports directly all aspects of our strategy. So our initiative, it's been going on for 10 years, just to explain very briefly. It's about working to reduce and reverse tropical forest loss, to both support the climate goals, biodiversity goals, sustainable development. We won't meet any of them unless we manage this transition, and it has to go extremely fast. We are running out of time to do this in a very different rate than we have managed to do so far. So our strategy is both to work with the tropical forest countries that reform their land use policies and try to reduce deforestation rates, as well as global markets trying to limit their impact on tropical forests. So every time you go to the supermarket, every time you invest in a stock portfolio, you contribute to deforestation as a consumer or as a financier. So this initiative to make high-resolution Earth observation imagery available to the public and even more detailed to the forest countries supports all of these aspects. The first one on land use policies. If you are to protect the forest, you have to know what's going on where. I mean, if you think about what happened to Google Maps in a city, imagine what this can do to areas that had very little information and very little common information among stakeholders that needs to come together to craft policy. So these imageries can help countries with land use planning to help decide who can do what where. This is not just about the forest area, it's about the whole landscape of economic activity. It can help them on law enforcement, right? So when Brazil managed to reduce deforestation dramatically, it was a combination of setting aside very valuable forests to protect as indigenous reserves or national parks, and to have a forest code that sets the regulations as to what farmers can do on their area, including setting aside areas for forest protection, and then use monitoring data or satellite data to inform a very successful law enforcement operation. And now Indonesia has repeated that and is dramatically reducing deforestation 4 years in a row. So it's about regulation and about control, and of course economic incentives. The more you manage to protect forest, the higher the returns for legal farmers to invest in productivity. Deforestation is always almost rational for the individual or the farmer or the company behind it, but it's also unnecessary at a societal scale, right? So to meet the future growing and more prosperous population, to meet its food demand, we actually need 1 billion hectares more forest, right? So it's about rationalizing how we use land. So that's the most important one. And then it supports measurements of their efforts to reduce deforestation. So we're working on carbon markets, how to create incentives to pay countries to reduce deforestation rates. With these data, we can actually reduce the uncertainty and improve their measurements. And then it supports indigenous peoples and local communities, right? So these are typically vulnerable populations, or they're not been part of a policy discussion. This allows them to use data to say, hey, look, this imagery shows that our land is being infringed upon by this and that company or actor. And then it allows the supply chain companies that I mentioned, the food and agribusiness, to monitor their supply chains and deforestation risk, and similarly the financial markets to make decisions on on risk, sustainability risk ratings around these same companies. So this and lastly on international forest crimes, which is also very important. That's similar to what each country is doing. So this supports each and every strategy that we have to reduce deforestation globally.
Yeah, great initiative. I mean, it's and it's good to see kind of the whole value chain, that it's not just focused on one thing. Will, do you want to say something from your perspective on what you think about this initiative, and should we have more of these type of initiatives around the world?
Well, it's obviously a leading question, but I like the way it's leading. Yeah, so firstly, the project is pioneering, most importantly for protecting the world's forests. I mean, the best way to add 100 billion hectares of trees is to first stop taking the existing ones down, and so that's where it can help there. And the Planet and Airbus and KSAT initiative can pretty much see individual canopies enabling one to see degradation. 40% of forest deforestation happens in the form of degradation, which is small individual tree pieces being taken out, which are very difficult to see without high resolution data, and the frequency of the data matters. Some of the data is made available as a public good, as Andreas is saying, on a monthly basis of the forest cover of these 64 countries, and then a lot more data is made available to the UN, FAO, Norway, and all the 64 countries, forestry departments in particular. Look, we have to get on this, and we have the data to act now, and so that's number one. But it is also pioneering as a partnership, as you mentioned, Agnieszka, that it's a public-private partnership where some of this data gets put out as a public good. The data was, originally in private hands. The NewSpace sector is just getting going. It's a lot of it's trying to find its business model. We're quite advanced in that stage, but now, a lot of these new data has been created. And unlike Copernicus, which has been centrally funded, of course, these missions are being funded for various commercial, humanitarian, non-profit, and other uses. And this sort of situation helps to fund some of that data to be accessible to those forestry ministries, accessible to the UN, but at the same time enables a commercial business case to be had to sell that data, to ensure that the NewSpace companies can continue to put up even better satellites that enable us to do even more monitoring. So it is really synergistic, and yes, absolutely, I hope that there's other partnerships. Last year Planet did the first map of all the world's coral systems. There's a lot more to be done in the ocean space, protecting mangroves, which are 4 times as much carbon stock per unit area as primal forests in the tropical forest. So we've got to protect the mangroves, the seagrass, marine protected areas to stop overfishing and ocean trawling. So there's a lot of work to be done in the oceans. There's a lot of work to be done in agriculture, to transition agriculture to sustainable agriculture, no tilling practices, use of cover crops, things like this, which can really help capture carbon and also increase biodiversity and decrease the pressure on deforestation. The dominant pressure on deforestation is actually in agricultural land being spread out for growing crops or grazing cattle, and we're chopping down the trees for that. And so the more efficient our agriculture can be, the less we pressure the forests. And then protecting key biodiverse areas, we've got to work on that. And these are all the key priorities of the Green Deal. The European Green Deal is just on the money with the priority setting, in my opinion. And I hope we can extrapolate the kind of idea that we've done for the forests, bring that to Europe first of all, because that, by the way, that work is in the tropics. We need to do the same for forests in Europe, and the boreal forests in Russia and Canada and lots of other places. And we need to do this work on agriculture and protecting the oceans. And I hope that we can do partnerships like the one that NICFI pulled together in those other areas where it's a public-private partnership. Some of the data gets out as a public good. Other data is paid for but made available to the necessary agencies for that public good. I really hope that that's possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, I know, for instance, so maybe going now to Florica or Mauro, I know Commission is also doing some public-private partnerships from time to time. Do you foresee maybe in the future, and obviously this is a non-committal question because I know things are just being put in place right now, but for instance, where Florica, you were talking about the new legislation or the climate action plan or these sort of things, is there any kind of room for collaboration with industry in general? And I'm not even just space industry, any sort of industry that can help the European Green Deal to move forward, to have this kind of big effort, cooperative big effort, or do you think this is not really the way the Commission will go forward?
Well, I say something generic, and then I will go a little bit better now back to the Earth observation. Of course, we do work all the time with industry. I mean, public-private partnership is not even a question, and we will never achieve it. Even though we have huge funding proposals, we will not achieve it. And we have a lot of collaborative stakeholder platforms with industry. So for me, it's a given, because we need also their ideas, and they have a lot of innovative ideas, but also we need to understand where are the hurdles and what is the critical mass we need to achieve. So on legislation, it's without any question. And I think Mauro can say something then specific on Copernicus and Earth observation, but I would like to come back because basically what we are talking here about is measuring and tracking biodiversity and biodiversity loss. And that is not such an easy issue. And it's not trivial. And we will come forward talking about legislation with a forest strategy, perhaps leading to some monitoring requirements, and also then with a deforestation regulation. And of course, monitoring of the state of the forest will be an important part of it. But now I have to say something, because I do not believe that Earth observation alone will do the trick, because it always has to be combined with data and verified and vetted with data from the ground, different ones. But it needs both probably, right? But of course you can go and say, we're not going on satellites, we go also on drones, we go also on airplanes, and so on and so on. The question is a little bit, what type of data do you want to look at? If you look at illegal deforestation, you can very well look at the on the trends, and you can have maps, and you see how much land is expanding, agricultural land is expanding to the detriment of, for instance, old growth forests. I mean, this you can do, but ultimately because some colleagues here speak about the business model, what you really have to look at is also what type of data are you producing that is ready-made, also in its analysis, for instance, the local or the regional authorities, in order to then make plans. Because the Earth observation is indeed quite important. For instance, if you want to look at pollution, I worked a lot in disaster risk management. Of course, we looked at forecasting, because you get the satellite images, you know where the flood is going, where the lava, where the eruption of the volcano is going, which towns to be evacuated, and so on and so on. This is super important. But if you go on forest, for instance, yes, you can look at the big trends, but the state of a forest, is it a good or a bad one? You will never see that with a satellite. That you need to be looking at the ground. But if I were to give an advice, is yes, public-private partnership. But if I were a company, I would definitely look at how to produce data and facilitate the update of data, because you want to go and bridge the gap between science and the policymakers, right? And make that. And I worked a lot with insurance and reassurance companies in the past. And you want to make the data available so that they can use it, sort of ready use. And that's more about not only the data, but also the analysis. But then, of course, you have lots of possibilities. But I just wanted to make some caution on For biodiversity loss, the measuring and the tracking is a bit more complex, but you need the combination of Earth observation and other forms. But I'm sure Maro will say more also about what Copernicus will and can do. Sorry.
Yes, so if I can come in, Florica, I totally agree with you. First of all, biodiversity is probably not one of the easiest areas where we can intervene with Earth observation. It's very important to have complementarity with in situ capacities. And I think we have to more and more to look into new solutions, new products. And for this, it's very important to have a continuous interaction and dialogue with the final user. Because I think when we generate data, it should not be top down, meaning, we generate a lot of data, we are very good. We have to make sure that this data, first of all, correspond to what the users are asking and make possible to generate products that can be useful to the final users. As you said, the state of health of a forest. Can we look into that? I think there might be means, but I think we have still some research to do in that respect. But the users, I think, should be at the core when we look in this respect. Speaking with the cooperation with industry, indeed, we have different models. It's true that a big part of Copernicus is publicly financed by the public money, but it's also true that we cannot generate all the data. The data that we generate with the Sentinels are a specific kind, but it would not be possible to make some products without buying data from commercial providers. And by the way, we decided not to enter in competition with the commercial market. So the data that are generated by the Sentinels, I would say, are data that in general can be a public good. And for this reason, we have a policy that is full, open and free, and the data can be available to everyone. When I'm speaking about this possible cooperation, and then we can see what could be the different models. Could it be PPP, can be anchor tenancy, or all the models? The two things that we need is quantity and quality together. The quality most probably can be generated by big satellites, very well calibrated, very expensive, and probably here is the public money that can help into that. But when we want more agile constellations with high revisit times, with very high resolution, that are almost consumables, I know that maybe using the word consumables when we're speaking about biodiversity is not the best word, but meaning that we can really have some agile information. There's the commercial market that is coming in. So the two, I think, can really cooperate together in order to achieve the final goal.
Yeah, I think this is the key. You know, sometimes I know we at Planet, I am being often asked, who's like, oh, do you see Copernicus as a competition, or you know, and it's not like that at all. I mean, it's just it's all about complementarity these days. You know, it's finding it's what we call at Planet 1 + 1 = 3. You know, so putting different data sources together, and that's a game changer really that offers the right solution. And what Florica was talking about, the data is great, but I mean, it's kind of useless if people don't know how to use it and what to do with it. So people don't care about data, they care about solutions, right? They want to get answers to their questions. And then companies like Overstory, for instance, can come in. And Indra, I wanted to ask you, do you see that what you're providing is appreciated and you have a market for it? Is it something that you think it's going to grow?
Yeah, I mean, you see definitely an increasing interest. And maybe to get back on that biodiversity part, I think we have a clear example where we focus a lot on, for example, vegetation species detection as part of our work with utilities and railroads. To give you an example, the species data is critical for our customers for two reasons. One, it helps them prioritize their vegetation management operations, and second, it helps them make sure that they're compliant with the regulations that also affects biodiversity, right? And we've developed machine learning models around Earth observation data to provide them with species labels for the trees and shrubs growing along their power lines. And before they were doing this with hand labels, they had drones, they did add some in situ data, but it was not scalable. So what we did for them is really bringing this solution throughout the whole of Spain, including the islands, also Balearics, Canary Islands, with 37 different species with a high enough accuracy validated by them in the field that will improve their decision making. I think that's a very concrete example of how Earth observation data is helping to ensure compliance with regulations that are designed to actually protect that biodiversity. I think if we can imagine an even broader adoption of this kind of approach, you could start to have a real impact on biodiversity at scale.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I just want to tell audience that you can start submitting your questions, of course, and we will ask our speakers your questions. So feel free to submit them. Andreas, I wanted to a little bit follow up on what you were talking about earlier, because you've mentioned about policy, and I'm also wondering, you know, when you, because what you have done, this sort of initiative, it's very big and costly. So I'm assuming you had to have some legal base in Norway to push this forward, and some general political will. How do you convince, how do the decision makers that this is the way forward, and why should Norway and Norwegian taxpayers pay for something that goes, you know, outside? I mean, obviously, public good, it's obvious that everybody should care, but we know how financing and politics work. So what is what's the secret there?
No, that's a good question. I think part of the secret was to first convince them that we need to save the tropical forests, and therefore we had a generous budget line for that, with a 10-year perspective and predictability. And then we considered doing this earlier. We didn't see that the costs had come down enough. We were approached by satellite providers and so on, and we thought that we couldn't justify it. And then the technology improved, the cost came down, and I think also our understanding of the importance of Earth observation, because initially we were set up to sort of with a fairly narrow focus, even though the goal was to address the tropical deforestation. The focus initially was to set up a global carbon market under the UN Climate Convention. This was ahead of the Copenhagen Climate Conference now more than a decade ago. And then we sort of looked at this as a transaction cost, only as the measurement piece. Well, I'm exaggerating. We knew it was more than that. But I think our understanding of how critical it is to assess the effect of policies, and for policymakers to know what works and what doesn't, and of course with the growing recognition also of global supply chains of soy and palm oil and beef and so on, that was an additional use case. And then I think lastly on the sort of, if the users were ready to use this, because that's been a big piece of this as well in the discussions. And we've, in addition to the satellite program itself, we're allocating fairly significant amount of resources to build capacity, right? So both to countries through the UN system, but also to civil society and so on. Our assessment was that the countries were ready to use it, but they were hindered by costs. And access, licensing, right? And also, yeah, they needed some training to use it. But I think so domestically, it was to explain that this could have a global impact, not just Norway in one country, but it's a sort of a global public good that could have unforeseen benefits that we weren't able to finance one by one. It's sort of the effect, the Copernicus and Landsat and these sort of big, there's a lot of studies, I think, that show the sort of multiplier effects of innovation. We couldn't have a grant scheme to say, apply for being innovative and get a grant from us. That if we finance this, there will be a lot of innovation that benefit from it. So I think that those are some of the reasons out, but I'm sure there are others.
Yeah, that makes sense. Will, have you I mean, you talked to a lot of governments, and you know, we have COP coming up this year, and there's kind of this climate topic is a hot topic these days. Do you see more openness for this sort of cooperation with industry and doing these sort of schemes that kind of have a focus on the global good?
Yeah, I've actually seen many countries looking to what NICFI have done, Norway has done, and decided to investigate whether or not to do the same. As I mentioned earlier, mangroves. So there's some interest in protecting all the mangroves. There's a lot of interest around small island states that are particularly vulnerable to to climatic events that are induced by extreme weather events that are based on climate, and preparedness, also taking into account their coastal areas and other green carbon stocks into their national contributions to the COP process. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of interest and initiatives in that. There's some interest in sustainable farming, as I said, switching agriculture from the former practices to sustainable agricultural practices, but the cornerstone of so many of the challenges, both of biodiversity and climate, is agriculture. So yeah, and we're very open to those sort of things. The more our data can get into the hands of those that are making decisions, and as has been said, it's not just the data, it's the capacity to use it, both the sort of analytics that sits on top of it, and also the understanding and knowledge of what it can do. So there's a lot of it's sociological as well. But I think the fundamentals are that we have tools at our fingertips to accelerate these Green Deal type and policy initiatives much faster than even we thought just a few years ago, and that's just tremendously exciting, because we obviously need to speed up our process. And again, I'm the silver lining of COVID is just having seen how fast we can change when society decides we need to. And here, climate and biodiversity loss have been taking place over the last a few decades in the most substantive ways. And it wasn't as crunch time like COVID, where it's hit us over a few months and we were like, oh man, we've got to change our behavior. It's been hitting us over 40 years instead of 4 months, that biodiversity loss has been going down. So it's not as urgent, it's not as critical to in our, because, or at least we don't perceive it as being as critical, but it actually is. And yeah, again, the silver lining is that we've seen that we can change behavior if we want. So now let's go and do that. We have these tremendous tools at our fingertips. Let's employ it together, public systems, private systems, knowledge on the ground, indigenous peoples. We need to all work together to protect biodiversity around the planet. And yeah, we just got to act fast.
Absolutely. Time is of essence here. Mauro, I have a question for you from the audience. Not 100% related, but nevertheless interesting. And the question is, what will EU SPA do vis-a-vis the DEFIS and ESA?
I think the first thing, because I don't know the composition of the audience, so I don't know if everyone knows what is EUSPA, what ESA. Yes, I imagine that people know what is the European Space Agency. EUSPA is the European Union for Space Program. It's actually the new name that is given to the GSA. GSA is the agency in Prague that up to now was dealing just with the navigations, just with Galileo. And now it's becoming really an agency for space program. It has been created by the new regulation that has been just adopted on the 12th of May. So since the 12th of May, we have a space program that is fully adopted, fully launched. And actually, maybe something that might be interesting to the audience is meaning also 14.8 billion euros that will be devoted to space activities, mostly Galileo and Copernicus, but also GovSatcom, SSA, and we are also speaking about secure connectivity for the future. In this frame, EUSPA has been not set up, but put in place with a mandate that is same as before, but expanded. And in Copernicus, they will have a new mandate that is mostly market uptake. Why that? Is because they are doing already market uptake for Galileo. They have been doing that for a long period. And taking into account that we are speaking about space applications, there are a lot of synergies. When we speak about companies that are generating new downstream market, for example, sometimes these space applications go together. I think there are many of the proposals that we can find also in our masters and so on that are proposing these two things going together. Example, when you need an emergency system that is looking, for example, when you have a fire, you need indeed to provide the fireman with the observation of the area, but the fireman has also to know where he is. So you need this kind of things. So USPA has this role. Beyond that, for the time being, their role is, I would say, limited to that. Indeed, they will work also a lot on communication aspect, but the core of the part of Copernicus is still remaining with the Commission for the coordination. ESA will continue to be the entity that develops the satellites and operates the satellites. So concerning Copernicus, USPA will not have any kind of role, differently from Galileo. So this, maybe, I hope that briefly clarified the question.
Absolutely, thank you. Thank you. I actually learned from this answer as well, because those are the, this is fresh stuff. So we're all figuring this out. Will, I have a question for you. Planet is also hosting Sentinel-2 data and Landsat. How do you work? Can you combine the two? Can you combine the public and Planet data together? How do you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And we spoke during the panel so far already a couple of times about how the Sentinel system and the Landsat system have their advantages, and the private system has its advantages, mainly radiometric accuracy and scientific accuracy and spectral bands, and then frequency and speed, the private sector. And yes, we in fact have some products. We've done our first product that combined Landsat, Sentinel, and MODIS data, as well as Planet Scope, into basically daily fused radiometrically accurate 3 meter imagery. So it sort of combines the best of both worlds, our Planet Fusion product. And we totally find that it's 1 + 1 = 3, meaning that we now have academic studies that show that the prediction accuracy for agriculture using this combination of mainly the Sentinel plus the Planet Scope fusion enables more accuracy than either data set alone. The same with forestry. Academics have now shown that now we have to work on bridging that gap, like we discussed earlier, between academic piece and the reality. But it's very clear that the accuracy for monitoring agriculture and increasing precision agriculture, and the same for forests, is better with a combination than either data set alone. And so we want to continue to work in that area of fusion. I think it's very, very exciting. Essentially, you get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a teamwork. I have a question. Maybe this next question can go to either Florica or Andreas or both. The question comes from the audience. We've been talking about private-public partnerships between the public sector industry, but what about universities? Is there a role for academia?
I think there's always, and when I said in the beginning, you need to build bridges also with the local and regional authorities or member states if you want. Clearly here you could team up also with universities, and this is also a wider part of the public-private partnership. And of course, in some countries this is easier, and in others, it is less known, but it's something which can be done. And by the way, also under we have big funding projects also on Horizon Europe and even under LIFE. There are many funding projects where you even have this combination also possible if you want. It's a question of which partners you use. I'm not sure. No, I stop here and then I take another question.
Okay, thank you. Andreas, would you like to add anything, or?
No, just I think that well, we're also part of the same research collaboration funding universities, but I think the fact that there's open more information available for everyone to use, of course, will benefit research, not just the research we fund, but research that are going on across the world. So absolutely keen to work with them and to see the results of what they come up with.
Thank you. Another question from the audience, whoever would like to take it. Can you spot regenerative agriculture, better use of soils using Earth observation? Can you see cover crops? Can you use ground penetrating technology?
I can take a stab at that. I mean, we've certainly monitored sustainable and regenerative agricultural practices from space. You can see whether or not tilling is being done, and increasingly regenerative agricultural practices do not use tilling or use less tilling. We can tell crop type and yield, which is why the data is useful for agriculture. But with that same data, and Indra was mentioning the same in terms of along the power lines and things, and you need data over time, but you can tell which sort of crop it is. So you can tell, is it a cover crop? Which cover crop is it? So you can monitor and enforce the policy objectives of using cover crop, reducing tilling practices, which keeps the carbon in the soil. Yeah, so absolutely, I think it's been done in sort of small areas where companies are really trying to do this. A number of big companies like Bayer and Corteva and others, you're trying to use this to develop much more systematic green agriculture initiatives to marry with the policies of places like the European Union, and we are there again to support that as best we can.
Thanks. Indra, maybe the next one would go to you. What do you make of the recent flow of venture capital money in the forest carbon monitoring arena?
Well, I think in general it is great to see more funding for climate focused startups. I think that's much needed, and I think we need all funding needed for all these different verticals. I think carbon is really a hot carbon offset verification is really a hot topic now, but I think we see an increase in venture capital across all these climate focused startups, and I think that's a good sign, but it's only the beginning. I think we need more and more, but it's a good signal that that these VCs do see also short and long-term profit in investing in these companies. So I think that's a first good signal. And there's also already been some successes in this field. So that really proves that it is possible, and that is the direction to move forward as well.
Thank you. Another question, which is an interesting question. It actually brings us from space back to Earth, but can we use the satellite data to reach and influence the consumers who drive major corporations? Are there any upcoming projects dedicated to bringing Earth observation data and ground truth to carbon markets down to the supermarket price tags that can potentially sway a consumer to buy lower carbon biodiversity preserving? I don't know, Florica, is that something you could, I mean, I know this is really a bit far-fetched, but, you know, could we?
It is an ideal, that would be the ideal scenario. But I think what we could do already is, I mean, everything what we do, whether, I mean, everything, all of our social and economic activity leads to pressure on the ecosystems. That's a fact, right? So when you have satellite data or intelligence, you can measure the contribution of these activities on the pressure on our biodiversity ecosystem and the state of our biodiversity system. If you were able, from using Earth observation data and the observation of the data, and you would put it into a more actionable, I mean, you extract the knowledge and put that into an actionable intelligent system, can be an app or whatever, I'm quite sure that it would raise awareness. And from awareness, people start changing their consumption pattern. Because look at what happened. Now we have so many information, even in an easy way, you know, films on Netflix and whatever, which has helped to raise awareness and make people think. And then, of course, if afterwards you would also say, what is a price tag? Because ultimately, the pressure on resources means these resources become almost more scarce, and therefore the price will go up. So logically, all of this information might help. Now, whether you can do this ultimately in an app or not, but you know, I give you an example. We will give out more information and want to give out more information on forest, on the state of forest, be it here, be it elsewhere. And of course, we will want to have a bottom-up approach of reaction, like planting new trees. That's one of the big issues under the forest strategy, planting 3 billion new trees, hopefully even more. Of course, when we visualize that, people perhaps say, oh yes, we will do it, or they will go to their political leaders and say, we also have to be part of it, be it private, be it regional, be it local. And it helps if a consumer, and for me, a consumer is a citizen, it's like you and me. If we know what's happening, people will start rethinking. And I think that's the lessons learned also from the pandemics. But if I may say so, you also have then to make sure that you explain that by going into more sustainable ways of producing and consuming, that you're not going to have less jobs, but necessarily also new jobs, and that you also cater for sustainability of prosperity. Because let's face it, the consumer want also to be sure not only whether they have something on their plate, but also whether their jobs are secure. And that equates this from green transition to green jobs, or sustainability of our economy and a fair transition and a fair economy. This is something where we would have to act much more, and we have to communicate more. And if it can be helped by giving information and downloading or spreading the intelligence from the Earth observation data and the analytics, it certainly would help. It's a contribution. We need a lot, as I said in the beginning, a lot of different actors to work together, but it is certainly eye-opening if you see on a global scale how much we have reached planetary boundaries, because people look at their own environment and they might say, oh, but everything is green here, everything is fine. But when you see the spatial data, you might see the trend is different, and that is important. Yes.
Can I just add that one of the in a panel where we're talking about Earth observation and climate, of course it's not just the data. It's the fact is that pictures tell 1,000 words, and we're in a beautiful situation that our technology is very visual and can help people just see the deforestation, to see the changes of practices, can see if there's more pollution in the rivers and what have you, and that's actually it can be that maybe we're underusing how this tremendous data is shown, because if we could get it into the hands of more people to just see what's going on, it will just help motivate action, right? Especially on a local level. So I think that we could probably do a better job of using these tremendous assets in that we have put up in space in that way.
Absolutely. Thank you, Will. I think that nicely wraps up our conversation. I know we could talk about it much longer, but our hour is up. But it is true, you cannot fix what you can't see. And we are offering a pair of eyes, so many pairs of eyes. And I think that should be used. As Florika said, I mean, this is just part of the solution. It's not an entire solution. We need lots of different data sources working together. It is a complex issue, but it is an issue that concerns all of us. It's not just about governments, not just about industry. It is also about responsibility of the consumers. We should be conscious, and we need to take care of ourselves and our planet Earth. Thank you very much, Will, Florika, Mauro, Indra, and Andreas. Thank you to the audience, and the recording is going to be available soon. And be a conscious consumer and a citizen of planet Earth. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.